Hi, my name is Jerry Prado. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Act Blue, and I am incredibly honored to be moderating this panel with Secretaries of States and candidates for Secretaries of States, and my home state Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold from Colorado, and also the head of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of States, an incredibly important organization. So we're going to get to talk a lot today about elections and the increasing importance, though I would suggest that this has always been an incredibly important role, especially at the local, the state level. And I think in 2020, we talked about a lot about how the election went, a lot of the deniers, the election deniers, hard for me to say that term. We'll talk more about that as well. But now, how are they laying the groundwork for 2020, for this coming November, and then of course for the cycle in 2024? So I feel very honored that we have this team here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and let them each introduce themselves. So I will start. I'll start with Secretary Griswold.
Well, thank you, Jerry. How are you guys doing? Good. Well, I'm Jenna Griswold. I'm the Secretary of State of Colorado. It's one of our 4 statewide elected officials. I was the first Democrat to win in 60 years when we won in 2018. I'm the youngest Secretary of State in the nation, which I will continue to be after all of our great candidates win in November. I'm also, oh my gosh, do not even tell me.
I have you by 1 month.
Oh my God. Get out of here. Okay, asterisk. I'm the youngest elected Secretary of State in the country. And this is why we both wear pink. It's because we're bringing joy and youth. But anyhow, I serve as the chair of the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State.
Mr. Cisco Aguilar, Nevada.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? It's good to be here. I'm Cisco Aguilar. I'm running for Secretary of State in Nevada. I'm an attorney. I've been in the business sports world. I served as chairman of the Nevada Athletic Commission. So I know the responsibility of a regulator, understand the responsibility of imposing the rule of law, of following the law, following the regulations, and making sure everybody is aware so that they get a fair shot at what they're trying to accomplish. I'm excited about this opportunity to run. It's going to be a great race. You know, Nevada is a battleground state, and we have to continue to protect every individual and citizen's right to vote. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Secretary of State Lee Chapman, Pennsylvania.
Great. My name is Lee Chapman. I'm acting Secretary of State of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I've been in this role since January. It's an honor to be here. I actually have welcoming remarks. So do you want me to do that now or a little bit later? Okay, great.
Great. We're going to do some welcome remarks from the Pennsylvania Secretary of State.
Our host.
Yes, our host. And in this amazing town, too, Pittsburgh.
Okay. Is this on? Can you hear me? Great. So good morning. Welcome to Pennsylvania. Welcome to Pittsburgh. It's an honor to welcome the Netroots Nation 2022 conference to Pittsburgh. And it's really good to be among so many progressive voices who work to protect access to the ballot box at a time when voting rights and the integrity of our electoral process are under renewed assault. I'm also pleased to participate on this panel discussion sponsored by DAS, with DAS Chair Secretary Griswold, Cisco Aguilar, and our moderator, Jerry Prado. We'll be discussing the critical role Secretaries of State play in ensuring the integrity of elections and defending democracy. This subject is especially timely given that we are 79 days away from a high-stakes midterm election that could very well determine the future health of American democracy. Let me start off by saying that I'm in a different position than many of my colleagues today who are elected to office. Pennsylvania is one of only 7 states and U.S. territories where the governor appoints a Secretary of State. And it is one of only 4 states where the appointed Secretary of State is also the chief election official. The Pennsylvania Department of State focuses on assisting 67 diverse counties with election administration and educating the Commonwealth's 8.7 million voters on the voting process. My job is to ensure that all eligible Pennsylvanians, regardless of political party, have the opportunity to participate in our democracy. So when people think of secretaries of state, they usually only think of elections, but my department also supports economic development through corporate filings and transactions, protects public health and safety through professional licensure, sanctions professional boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, and mixed martial arts, and maintains registration and financial information for thousands of charities that solicit within the Commonwealth. We really do a lot. But on the election side, Pennsylvania continues to be in the spotlight. 2020 was the first year our state had the option of no excuse mail-in voting. Since the 2020 election, we've seen more than 5 million votes cast through mail-in ballots. This option came by way of bipartisan legislation known as Act 77, signed into law by Governor Tom Wolf in late 2019. And Act 77 made the most significant changes to Pennsylvania's election code in over 80 years. Despite that, both Act 77 and the 2020 election have been the subject of an unprecedented amount of litigation. There have been more than 36 lawsuits here in Pennsylvania, some of which are still being litigated. We have persevered, and just recently we experienced some significant legal victories. A few weeks ago, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently upheld the constitutionality of Act 77 and no excuse mail-in voting. And just yesterday, the President Judge of the Commonwealth Court ordered 3 counties, each who refused to count undated ballots in the primary election, to count them by August 24th. Unfortunately, in addition to an increase in litigation, we also have seen an increase in threats against county and state election officials, and I am committed to protecting these essential frontline workers in our democracy. So now, with only 79 days to go from the midterm election, Pennsylvania finds itself still in the spotlight again, with open races for governor and a seat in the U.S. Senate. These are challenging times for those of us who are committed to the integrity of our electoral process. All of us here in this room can play a part to protect democracy. Help us be the truth tellers in this pivotal time. First, we need your help in educating and informing voters about registration and voting deadlines, polling place hours, and other vital information they need to exercise their precious right to vote. And second, help us communicate about how important it is to count every vote after an election and to allow our election officials to do their jobs. When our democracy is at stake, we must get it right. And third, continue to help us recruit election day volunteers, specifically poll workers. We need people who are truly committed to free and fair elections to serve in these roles. So thank you for being here in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and for the work that you do to support democracy. So I'll now pass it over to our moderator, Jerry.
Thank you so much for that. And as you can hear, there's so many things that the Secretaries of States oversee and so many interesting other elements that they oversee state by state. And so I think that's a great laying the groundwork for the questions we're about to go into, and you get to hear from this fantastic panel. So the first question I'm going to ask, and I'll go to you, Cisco, first. How's that? And then I'm going to go to Secretary Griswold, and then we'll go back to Secretary Chapman. So can you talk about the role that Secretaries of States play? And we heard about Pennsylvania a bit here, but tell us about the importance of Nevada, and then of course, what is critical today and what you're facing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Can you hear me? Is this thing working? Secretary of State role in Nevada, much like Pennsylvania, although we have an athletic commission that oversees boxing and UFC and all those good fun things. Secretary of State Nevada oversees corporate filings, security filings. So on the small business side, that's pretty impactful. But I think we're all here to talk about elections. The Secretary of State in Nevada is the regulator for elections. The 17 counties execute and implement the actual elections, but the Secretary of State acts as the referee for those elections. Once the election is certified by the county commissions, it's submitted to the Secretary of State's office, and then it's submitted to the Nevada Supreme Court for certification. The Secretary of State's role in Nevada is critical because when you're implementing or interpreting those rules and regulations down to the county, you have to be fair, you have to be neutral, because it's your responsibility that no matter your party affiliation, that you are allowing and making sure every voter's vote counts. And people have to have trust in that individual. Our current Secretary of State is a Republican, but she's done a great job in ensuring that all Nevadans' votes matter. She's been fair, she's been transparent, she's been open about the decisions she's made. She's investigated all the claims of fraud or lack of integrity in our election system. And our courts have also interpreted those. So continuing that vision, continuing that mission to be the neutral regulator that you are. As a former regulator, I understand, even though it was within the mixed martial arts world, the unarmed combat world, it still was pretty significant in Nevada because talk about the economic impact of our major fights, our title fights. That was our first professional sport. And the amount of gaming revenue that goes through those activities, it had to be somebody that was trustworthy, it was fair, understood the rule of law, understood what it meant and the implications you could have on a state. So I'm excited about the opportunity. I know what we need to do in Nevada, and we're going to continue to get there. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm actually going to ask, since Secretary Griswold in Colorado has done so much to expand access to the ballot box in Colorado, I'd love to hear, one, what's of course important and what's on tap for you, but what are some innovative solutions that you're looking at? And then I would love for you to talk about what the map looks like for DAS and for all the Secretaries of States.
Absolutely. And Jerry, you're forgetting to ask me a question. So we're talking a lot about the regulator and overseeing martial arts. I want to tell you guys, I have a SEAL team in my office.
I did not know.
To protect the state seal. I'm just joking. We do protect the state seal, and I call it a SEAL team, and no one thinks it's funny. But anyhow, so, well, Jerry does. I'm here just to make Jerry laugh. So, you know, I was elected in 2018 in a time where I don't think the nation knew the importance of these seats. And in 2019, I worked with our legislature to pass the largest democracy reform in the country. Since I've been Secretary of State, we continue to have the gold standard of elections. We have vote by mail for all. We affirmatively just send every registered voter a ballot. We have early voting. We have same-day voter registration. We also have the most secure elections in the country. And in the last almost 4 years at this point, I've increased drop boxes by 65%. We passed parolee reenfranchisement. That was 11,000 people on parole reenfranchised and registered to vote just like that. We guaranteed access in every public university and tribal lands and saw a 20% increase in tribal voting in just 2 years. We passed and implemented automatic voter registration, which registered 250,000 people in the middle of the pandemic. We also, by the way, took on Donald Trump to stop him from stealing the election from the American people by slowing down the mail. And that had rippling effects across the nation. And as you know, the list of accomplishments and what we've done to increase access continues. But you know, things really changed at the end of 2020 when we started to see the massive attack on democracy. So, of course, we're continuing to open up access. You know, the trick of it is, if you want people to vote, they will. We have the second highest turnout in the country. But unfortunately, we've really had to turn to protecting our election infrastructure, election workers, and voters, and we can get into that. As for the map of what lays ahead of us in how many days? 97? What? 79? Oh my gosh. You guys, we have less than 80 days to save democracy. There are election deniers running in Michigan, in Nevada, in Arizona, in Minnesota, in New Mexico. We have one of the nation's worst voter suppressors running in Georgia again. Can you imagine thinking, oh, predominantly black voters are standing in lines up to 11 hours, let's make it even harder. That's what that Secretary of State just did. We are seeing these extremists try to take over our nation's elections. What we can expect from them is to suppress the vote, destabilize elections, and lie and be more beholden to Mar-a-Lago than the American people. That's why we have to stop them. We have fantastic candidates. Bee Wynn in Georgia, Jocelyn Benson in Michigan, Cisco in Nevada. Adrian Fontes in Arizona, Steve Hobbs in Washington, Steve Simon in Minnesota, and I'm an okay candidate in Colorado also. And we have to win these races to make sure that the American people can still decide their elected officials. That's what's on the line, and that's what DAS is fighting for.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Secretary. All right, Secretary Chapman, I'm coming to you. Pennsylvania obviously is always a state that everybody is watching. So we'd love to hear from you. What are you talk a little bit more about your race, but also what you think both internally and externally we should know about what's going to be happening in Pennsylvania coming up and in all the different races, and of course how elections are administered.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, I'm appointed, so I don't have to run for office like my colleagues up here. I'm just laser focused on making sure that we have, accessible elections in Pennsylvania. But that comes with it's an interesting role being an appointee because I'm part of the governor's cabinet. And it also is very helpful when it comes to making sure that we are streamlining implementation within the state. So as Secretary of State, a few things that I have the authority over is to issue guidance to our 67 counties. So, they clearly know what the rules are to implement elections. I can also issue directives when it comes to voting machines and also just streamline the process for voters. So actually, something that we're really proud of that we just released yesterday is a streamlined vote by mail and voter registration request form. So in one form, you can register to vote and you can also request your mail-in ballot, which I'm not aware of any other state that's currently doing that. So we put that online and released that yesterday. But one thing that we are really looking at is making sure that we're combating mis and disinformation, which is something that's been prevalent online and through other venues. Just a few months ago, there was disinformation that spread on Twitter about elections here in Pennsylvania, and it said that mail-in voting is illegal, which we all know is not true, and actually the Supreme Court just ruled it as constitutional. So, we reported that to Twitter. I reached out to Twitter. They did suspend that account, but that's just one example. We have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have Snapchat, we have Instagram, we have so many different TikTok, right? So many different ways that disinformation can spread. So we're also very focused on making sure that voters have accurate, reliable information from a trusted source, which is our department, and that we are getting that information to them through, text messages, emails, whatever means we can, that's what we're using. So I also wanted to give another example. We actually recently heard in the news that there was a group that is targeting individuals in nursing homes, actually, trying to get them to report voter fraud from nursing home administrators around mail-in voting. So, because I am an appointee, I was able to get the other secretaries that touch nursing homes, like the Secretary of Health, Human Services, Aging, Veterans Affairs, to write a sign-on letter that went to every single nursing home administrator in the state just to remind them what the rules are around voter intimidation, how they can report anything that happens. So, we are really laser focused on making sure that individuals have the tools to make sure that every vote is counted and every voter's voice can be heard.
Thank you for that. I know, listen, as Secretary said, there's so much delicate messaging that goes on around here, and even a little bit of misinformation just really puts people, I think, in a lot of confusion about what they can and can't do. So what I would love to come to you on, Cisco, is election denying. I find that to be just a term in general. I can't get my head around that, but I would love to hear what you're up against. You are up against, I believe, someone, I won't say his name, I can let you if you want, who is an election denier, and what that looks like to actually take on someone who has that kind of focus and frankly is really just scaring people about voting. So with that, I'd love to hear what you're up against here and what election denier actually looks like and says.
Absolutely, but first let me just, Secretary Griswold mentioned about what Colorado's been able to accomplish, and I cannot forget what our leaders in Nevada have done. They have implemented early voting. They have implemented mandatory mail ballots. They have done, top-down voter registration. And my opponent wants to take away every opportunity for a Nevadan to vote. Nevada's unique in the fact that we have a very unique 24/7 economy. On a Tuesday in November from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., does not work for our working families to get out and vote. And that's why we need to ensure, and it's my responsibility if elected, to protect every right of access that our voters have in Nevada. Talked about Colorado increasing its participation among our Native community by 20%. We hit 25%, and I think that's only the beginning because we have not tried hard enough. When that denominator is so small, you can get to 25. We need to do better, and we can do better. And my opponent sees this and knows that the only way he can win an election is by limiting access to the polls. And I am there to fight him every second of the way to take that fundamental right away. You talk about the ballot box. Our fundamental rights, our freedoms are guaranteed by that participation. And he wants to take that away, and I'm not going to allow him to do that. Because if you talk about the power of education, I'm a product of a family that was not well educated, but they were hardworking. And I am where I am today because of the public education I have. In Nevada, we can't be as proud as we should be about our public education system. We need to be better, and the only way it's going to change is when we get our 5th largest school district in the country, in Clark, where Las Vegas is located, and is majority minority. It's those parents that are going to change the outcome of our state going forward, and it's my job to get those parents to the polls to be able to vote. So when this election denier, not only is he an election denier, he is the chief of election deniers. He's gone throughout the country, aggregated all of his buddies, and said, this is what we need to do to take away democracy and to win the elections we want to win so that only a select few can determine where we are going as a democracy. So I see this guy, it motivates me, it fires me up, because I want to take him to task on what he says and how he is being irresponsible, how he's being dishonest with Nevadans. And it's my obligation to expose him for that. So.
Thank you, absolutely. So I will go to you, Secretary Griswold. One of the things that we're seeing, well, two things we're seeing that I think are the atrocities around this. Number one is looking at where there's a drop box, I think, in Texas for 1.4 million citizens to actually vote. And then the second is a formation of election police in Florida. Just abhorrent. I find, so old, so, hearkening back to days that, we all thought we would never see again. But I'd love to hear, what your thoughts are about that and what you're all doing to actually push back on these types of terrible initiatives.
Yeah, I think you guys probably all know there's an ongoing stealing of American democracy. 2020, we saw a failed attempt to steal the presidency. Donald Trump, more comes out every single day. We knew they were trying to slow down the mail. He told us in 2020, I am trying to make it impossible or harder for Democrats to use vote by mail, because he thought that's how he could win. We know there were conversations about seizing voting equipment. We know Rudy Giuliani was running around the country trying to seat fake alternative electors to take away Americans' votes. We know they mounted a violent insurrection, some of whom were planning on hanging the Vice President of the United States to try to stop the certification of the duly elected President Joe Biden. That all happened. It failed. Now the focus is on 2022 for 2024. What we're seeing across this country is stripping Americans of their freedom to vote. 33 voter suppression bills passed last year, 500 introduced from the beginning of January. This is a coordinated effort to make it harder for people, often people of color, working people to cast a ballot. Number two, we're seeing the destabilization of elections. So antics like what Jerry was saying to make people think something must be wrong. And that big lie is then the basis to threaten election workers. Election workers across this nation, 1/6 say they have been directly threatened for doing their job. In Fulton County and Atlanta, every single election worker stepped down after 2020. Steve Bannon and extremists are literally recruiting in. We're seeing some county election workers embrace the conspiracies and become insider threats themselves. We're seeing big lie Secretary of State candidates, people like Jim Marchant in Nevada, who says that he would not have certified the election for Joe Biden. The Republican nominee in Arizona, who says if he wins, a Republican will never lose again. We're seeing the destabilization of elections and then all the lies, all the fake political theater corrode Americans' belief in free and fair elections. All of this is for the next time they want to steal the presidency. So either the American people cannot vote, or something is going on in the state, so there's a basis to say, go seize that voting equipment, go sit those fake electors, or the next time the American people, a higher percentage, are with the people storming the Capitol. This is a very dangerous time, and what we have to do is stop these folks. We have to fight against the voter suppression. We have to prosecute people who would break the law to try to steal elections or spread misinformation, and we have to beat them at the ballot box.
Thank you. And Secretary Chapman, I'd love to hear from you. I know not only you were recently appointed this year goes fast, but before then you've held so many positions too that really are dedicated to this. So from your perspective too, what are some other big threats and really innovative things that you would like to do in Pennsylvania or that you're seeing others do around the country?
Sure. I wanted to piggyback on something that Secretary Griswold said. We've seen a lot of turnover when it comes to election directors in Pennsylvania. We've had 35 election directors actually resign since 2020 because of election threats. Some of it has been planned retirements, but that's something that we really need to call attention to because there is a lot of high turnover and people are, being intimidated every day for just doing their jobs. So at the Department of State, we're really trying to support county election officials as much as we can. We have office hours every 2 weeks where we're supporting them, answering their questions, making sure that they have the tools they need to be successful at our elections. But it's something that's unfortunate that such an important job has become so politicized when it's nonpartisan, right? It's about making sure everybody can vote. But it's important that we have people who are filling in those roles because they're really the frontline workers. One thing that I would say about Pennsylvania in particular that we're trying to get ahead of the narrative is that every vote needs to be counted. In Pennsylvania, we don't have pre-canvassing like a lot of other states do. So out of our 67 counties, they can't actually start opening and processing mail-in ballots until 7 a.m. on election day. So that's why, on election night in 2020, when they're saying, you remember, Pennsylvania is still counting those votes, right? Or even during our primary this year, Pennsylvania is still counting those votes, and it's Friday after the election. It's because election officials don't have that opportunity to start counting until the day of the election. We are requesting, and actually all counties are requesting, it's bipartisan, that counties have at least 2 weeks to start that processing. And that will put us in line with other states. We can have results early, like Florida, right? We could actually call election results on election night if we have that, and that will really instill confidence in our elections. But that's not the situation we're in, so it's important for us to manage expectations and let people know that, it's going to take time, right? But that doesn't mean that there's anything nefarious or anything bad happening. That's just the system that we're working in. And one thing to note that's different this year in this election is counties received additional funding from the state this year. Counties just received $45 million in additional funding, but that funding actually came with a requirement that counties have to vote continuously. So they have to start at 7 and they have to continuously vote until the last vote is counted. So they can hire more staff with that money. So hopefully we'll get results a little bit faster with that, but we'll see. This is the first election that we have that in place. But it's really important that we're managing expectations and really combating the narrative that there's something that's going amiss, because it's not. We just have to let election officials do their job and count every vote.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll get back a little bit to some of the political strategy here, and Cisco, I'm going to start with you. This is such an important position, and this constitutional offices, there are others that are also incredibly important, like attorneys general, but we know the top of the ticket is generally what people are focused on, the Senate, the governor's races, but this is so important. And does that change your tactics, knowing that there is a little bit of a drop-off on voters? Does that change your tactics and how you're going to reach out or have your campaign strategy a little bit different so that people are looking at your race, which is critical to our democracy? Like, how do you think about that changing your tactics, if at all?
No, it's absolutely critical because, again, when you look at my opponent, he has a strong base of support. We know they're going to get out and vote 100%. So what am I going to do to motivate our base and those that I want to earn their vote to understand why they are impacted on a daily basis by the Office of the Secretary of State? And it goes back to an earlier comment I made. I'm in this race because of the kids. I started a school in one of our most vulnerable neighborhoods in Las Vegas, and I looked at those kids during the November 2020 election, and I thought, if somebody's going to stand up for these students and for these families, the school is 86% Latino. And so they're kids like me, whose parents were hardworking and looking for opportunities for their children to be better than they were. And I just sat there and I said, these are the students I'm going to go fight for. I'm going to give them a voice, but also let them know that they can too serve one day in the Secretary of State's office. You look at our Latino community, I think there are three major priorities. One, it's the education of their kids. It's their job. Are they going to be able to have that job for the long term? And three, it's their small businesses. Latinos are very entrepreneurial. The Secretary of State impacts every one of those. And it's from access to the ballot box and explaining why education is determined at the ballot box. Two, it's the Secretary of State oversees all corporate and security filings. Again, you go back to economic development. You are there to serve them. Our system in Nevada is a bit complicated, and I can go on and on. As a lawyer doing corporate filings, no small business in Nevada should have to hire a lawyer to be able to do their corporate filings. It should be something simple. We use technology every day in our lives to make our lives more efficient. The Secretary of State owes that obligation to small business owners as well. And so getting them to understand that, hey, the Secretary of State is here to serve you and your business. Let's do it. You know, we had the opportunity to go to Broad Acres last weekend, which is our swap meet, small business. There's tons of them. But you talk to them about the implications they have on a daily basis of trying to build their business, access to capital, and it all starts at the Secretary of State's office. And so getting them to understand the connection points and say, yes, that's why I'm going to go vote for that Secretary of State candidate. My opponent doesn't give a crap about small businesses. Not once during this cycle has he mentioned the responsibility of the Secretary of State's office to serve small businesses. All he's talking about is how he and his friends are going to win these elections going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and Secretary Griswold, I will say this. I'm going to preface this by saying this was maybe 4 years ago. I can't believe it was 4 years ago. I have not seen somebody who was so dedicated to serve and win election just jump into working hard, like just right off the bat. Secretary Griswold was out there talking to everyone and you know, raising money, which is what we need to do to be able to do all the things. But it was pretty phenomenal. So I'd love to hear from you too. What was your strategy, and what is your strategy, if at all, different than it was 4 years ago?
Yeah, so I started running statewide, never having ran for elected office at all, at the age of 32 or 33 for a seat a Democrat hadn't won in 60 years against the only Republican statewide incumbent in the state of Colorado in 2018. It was an impossible race. On top of that, folks like me don't tend to run and they don't tend to win. I grew up in a cabin with an outhouse outside in rural Colorado on food stamps. I started working the summer after 7th grade. I'm first in my family to go to a 4-year college and then law school. So it was an impossible race, but I think, you know, growing up like that, number one, just teaches you that you're always the underdog and you have to outwork everyone. So we were relentless that first campaign. No one thought we could win. And I ended up getting the second highest amount of votes in the state of Colorado on 1/24th of what the governor spent. We outperformed the entire Democratic ticket in more counties than not, and in swing places like Pueblo. So we flipped this seat, and you know, I think it's important that we win these races and then we do exactly what we say we are going to do. And I've been able to really provide results. But I'll tell you, the conventional wisdom of the folks sitting in DC thinking about races is, it's down ballot, people really don't care about a Secretary of State race. Well, there's two things that I think you need to win races. Number one, you need enough funds to communicate to folks, but you also need something to talk about. You don't need the most money. You need to communicate and have something to talk about. And I'll say, for the Democratic Association of Secretaries of State, in every single one of our Tier 1 races, we either have a woman running, a person of color, every single person under the age of 50. Many of us who grew up first in our families to go to college. Bee Win in Georgia, she's the daughter of refugees from Vietnam. We all have the ability to connect with the American people in a much different way than the standard folks who end up running for statewide office or going to Congress or the Senate. But for me, this election cycle, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm the top target in the state of Colorado. I'm up against a candidate, my Republican opponent, who has a super PAC already backing her, who already dumped in $500,000 just in the primary. We're seeing a coordinated effort across this nation to stop Democratic candidates for Secretary of State and to take out the incumbents. And it's very easy to understand why. Democratic Secretaries of State, when we get elected, we're not there to help Democrats. My job as Secretary of State is to make sure that every eligible Republican, Independent, and Democratic voter has access to free and fair elections. My duty is to the people, not to the party. We are seeing the MAGA extremists want to take these seats because they don't believe in that very fundamental principle of our nation anymore. So that's why these races are hard. In Colorado, I have some of the lowest contribution limits in the entire country. These races are often first or second time candidates, and the stakes are so high, these races are must win in 3 months.
Absolutely, thank you for that. I have a question. I think you had talked about this earlier, so I want to come back to this when you're talking about poll workers. Whoever knew, I don't know if everybody, I love going to the polls to vote. I also love voting by mail. It's, fantastic. But when I used to go into the polling locations, you have volunteers, people who are really just wanting to be involved. And now you have this, the threats that they're focusing on, but also we don't have as many. So what are you looking at, I don't know if you've heard, especially in your previous roles too, what are we doing to continue to get people to come and want to be, poll watchers or poll judges or people who welcome you when you come in to get your vote?
That's a good question. And just curious, how many people in here are from Pennsylvania? Okay, so there's still a lot of people from other states. People were shocked to learn that most poll workers in Pennsylvania are elected. Yes, a lot of people don't know that. So the judge of elections, that's actually an elected position, and it happens on an off year. So 2023 will be the year when judges of elections are on the ballot. So it's a great entry point in Pennsylvania to start running for office is becoming a poll worker. Of course, you also have other poll workers in the polling place. There's around average 5 poll workers per polling place, so people can still sign up and serve in those roles. But the people who are in charge are actually elected offices. And a lot of times people aren't running for those roles because people don't know about them. They don't know that they're elected. So I know a lot of stakeholder organizations and nonprofits in Pennsylvania are trying to get the word out about those races because when there are vacancies, that's when the Board of Elections appoints people. But it's important that we have poll workers in the community that represent the community. In Pennsylvania, we actually have, we require under the Voting Rights Act, Section 203, to have 3 languages, English, Spanish, and also traditional Chinese in certain counties. So Philadelphia has to have materials in Spanish and traditional Chinese. Lehigh, it's Spanish. So it's important for us to have poll workers who are bilingual in multiple languages as well. So earlier this week on Tuesday, we celebrated Help America Vote Day, which was a poll worker recruitment day. So we really did a lot of social media to push out the fact that we need poll workers. There's around 9,000 polling places in Pennsylvania. So when you look at the 67 counties, an average of 5 poll workers per county, that's 45,000 people that we need to fully staff our polling places. And even before the COVID-19 pandemic, it was always a challenge to recruit poll workers. Another thing that's unique to Pennsylvania is if you're 17 years old, you can also serve as a poll worker. A lot of states don't have that, so making sure that we're partnering with high schools to ensure that we have that pipeline to have robust volunteers across the Commonwealth to serve.
Thank you. It's always amazing to hear. This is a huge endeavor. Watching elections, everything you oversee is phenomenal and massive and so volunteer. But then, yes, it's great to hear about elected judges as well. Cisco, I'm going to ask you about this too, because you live in a very rural state where there's concentrations, and then you have, a lot of people around the state too. So, I'd love to hear too what you're all looking at with poll workers and actually how your system works, which might be very different than Pennsylvania.
Yeah, again, Nevada has 17 counties. Washoe and Clark are probably the largest because you have Reno and Las Vegas in those two. The other 15 counties, we have one county in Nevada right now, Nye County, which the county commission there determined to go to paper ballots and hand counting. And you talk about that and you go, what the heck are we doing? Why did we get here? Why is this happening? How did they make this decision? Another county, Esmeralda, which has 300 voters in the primary, it took 8 hours to count. They did paper and hand counting. It took them 8 hours to count those 300 ballots. Now you talk about Nye County with 31,000 voters. They're going to do that by entirely paper, hand counting. How are they going to ensure, one, accuracy? How are they going to ensure efficiency? And then you talk about my race, which we are viewing and completely viewing as a margin race. We are going to have to work our butts off to be able to get the voter engagement we need to win this race. But then when you have potentially 15,000 of those 30,000 voters determine the outcome of my race, this is a scary situation, and we need to educate the public about the importance of accuracy, efficiency, timing, because it could take days for those 31,000 ballots to get counted, and that's an unfortunate part. Secretary of State's office right now is determining what the regulations for that hand counting and paper ballot look like. We need to continue to push and watch what we're doing in these counties for this process. But on the rest, again, it goes back to challenges of what do our tribal communities have access to? Where are their drop boxes? What are the local counties doing? In Alco County, which is where one of the largest gold mines in the Western Hemisphere is located, a large Latino community, they're asking for ballots in Spanish. And the county has said no, because again, they want to drive votes to their side and not give everybody the fair chance. Those are some of the things I would focus on as Secretary of State, is to ensure that, again, the quality of our systems, the accuracy of our systems, the integrity of our systems, the fairness, the openness of them all exist across the entire state, no matter where you live. But somebody has to fight that fight, and if you don't fight it and make it a priority, things are never going to change. So it's kind of interesting. Again, 85% of the voters live in Clark, and yes, we can say Clark is a priority, but that's not who we are in Nevada. We value every single one of our citizens. It's not about being a Democrat. It's not about being a Republican. It's not being in the urban core. It's about being anywhere you are in Nevada, you can have faith, and you know the person running those elections is honest, trustworthy, and the information that my opponent is sharing with voters is inaccurate. And we know we're going to have a challenge to be able to overcome that. I get asked all the time, what are you going to do about it? There's not much I can do other than to listen to this voter, understand what the issues are, be empathetic, try to encourage them to continue to have faith. But again, it goes by actions. It's being like Secretary Griswold and saying, this is what we're going to do for all Coloradans. We're going to show you by actions why we're doing what we're doing is in the best interest of every single voter, and that every single vote counts.
Thank you. And Secretary Griswold, you've done so much to modernize elections in Colorado. What's your next big hill? What are you thinking? I want to make sure that we're even more modern next time. So in your next term.
Jerry, you want more from me? No, I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So there's a lot still to be done. There's always ways to improve. One of the things I'm really excited about is automatic voter registration with tribal ID. So yeah, we just so we're working on pilots for that, and why it's so exciting. Colorado has 2 tribes located in state border, but the vast majority of tribes use the same ID technology. In Colorado, number one, we're a pioneer on automatic voter registration. We're also the most secure state in which to cast a ballot. So if we can get it right, we could potentially expand that across the country. So I'm very excited about that. But to tell you the truth, Jerry, things shifted at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. I think a lot of us thought, like in the elections world, we just have to get through this election. Global pandemic, sitting president trying to steal the presidency. We'll get through this and things will go back to normal. That was very much wrong. We are under the worst attack on democracy in recent times. Everything is at stake. And so I've had to really shift what my focus is with my legislative leadership. So this year, I passed the nation's first law on insider threats. That's when an election worker embraces conspiracies and tries to compromise the voting systems themselves. We had the first in the nation, unfortunately, insider threat when County Clerk Tina Peters, working with the MyPillow guy and QAnon, compromised her own voting equipment. So I just passed the first law making it a felony to compromise voting equipment, making it a felony to allow unauthorized access to equipment. It's a felony to disclose sensitive passwords to the equipment, and we provided whistleblower protections and made sure that no big lie actor could stop the certification of an election in the state of Colorado. We also just passed a law to make it a crime to dox or threaten election workers. These are just volunteers. There are grandparents, there are neighbors, there are Republicans and Democrats. They should not be threatened for doing the most patriotic, at least one of the most patriotic things you can do. I just led legislation to prohibit open carry within 100 feet of a drop box, a voting center, or where you process ballots. Voters should not be intimidated from going to cast a ballot anywhere in this nation. I also had to lead a law so that I can get more regular state patrol protections. So I think a couple of things. Number one, we are going to save democracy in 3 months. We are. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but every single one of us in this room is going to get it done. But these attacks on democracy and our fundamental freedoms, unfortunately, it will not be over in 2022. So for my next term, I'm going to continue to push for the best elections in the nation, the most secure, the most innovative, the cutting edge, the most accessible, and I'm going to do every single thing within my power to protect our election infrastructure, voters, and election workers.
Thank you for that. It's very exciting and very, just a constant reminder of how important everything you're doing is. So thank you so much. So with that, I also want to hear back from you, Secretary Chapman. We have some more minutes, and I'm going to ask you the big question at the end about what you want everybody to know. But right now, I'd love to know too, like on your end, what do you think the most big next modernization of voting in your state that you're looking forward to?
That's a really good question. You know, we've already done so many things to modernize our elections. We're actually in the process of upgrading our state election database right now. So that's something that we are rolling out. We'll have election night returns up and running for November, which is very exciting, a brand new website. But we are actually pretty far ahead of a lot of states. We actually have a web API that stakeholder organizations, other agencies have been using for years now to integrate into our online voter registration system. So as individuals are in the field registering voters, you know, on their iPad for OVR, it's integrated right into our system. And so we're looking at ways on how we can expand that, you know, really to have other agencies within the state, you know, as people are submitting their information to get benefits, how that is also, they're given an opportunity to register to vote. So that's something that we've done that's pretty cutting edge. Also with our online voter registration, we've partnered with a company called Kofax, where if someone doesn't have an actual ID or a signature on file, they can just sign their name on a white piece of paper, take a photo of it with their phone, and their signature is uploaded automatically. So, you know, there's a lot of best practices that we have done already in Pennsylvania, but we just need to expand upon what we've already built. But when it comes to policy, I mean, there's a lot we need to do. You know, I said we only got no excuse vote by mail in 2020, right? Where many states have had it for years. So we need to have that automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, pre-canvassing. There's a lot that we need to do on the election reform side so we can get towards that 100% participation in the election process. There's still around 1.7 million people in Pennsylvania who are eligible to vote but still haven't registered, and so we need to think of creative ways on how to reach those individuals.
Thank you. And then Cisco, you talked about how important it is. Well, yes, Clark County is where the majority of the voters are. Nevada obviously is a huge state with populations everywhere. I remember I lived in New Mexico and worked in New Mexico for a while, and we were still faxing things in. And that's not because people don't want to be more modernized. It's funding. So I'd love to hear some of the things that you have in mind, and also maybe some of the things that people in rural counties still really grapple with.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the Secretary of State's office, through its corporate and security filing system, is the third largest revenue generator to the general fund. So we are a moneymaker for the state of Nevada. People come to Nevada to do their corporate filings because we are the Delaware of the West. However, that technology that we have is outdated. It's not invested. And when you're making money, to be able to continue to make the money, you've got to make investments in your infrastructure. And the same thing is on our election side. We need to secure and continue to be secure. We have great elections. We're some of the most secure in the country. Probably better than Colorado. Sorry, Secretary. But we need to continue to invest in those systems, because if we don't, we can slide quickly. And that's where the confidence of the voter comes in, is making sure that every county that buys systems, we are there to support them. They are continue to be the most quality and the most up to date, so that the voter has that trust that when they know they walk into that ballot or ballot box, or they walk into that voter booth, they are able to know that their vote matters. Clark, our legislature meets every other year, so we don't get the opportunity to have annual legislative sessions to pass some of this legislation we need to pass. Again, it goes to voter worker protection. Yes, I'm putting myself out there to be criticized for what I'm doing as Secretary of State. Most of these workers are going to work every day to provide for their families. They're not being asked to be harassed. We need to stand up as Nevadans and protect every single poll worker, every person working in the election system. Right now, the Secretary of State's office is down 33% in personnel because people are afraid, and that is scary. We lost some of our best clerks registers in 2 of our 17 counties because they've been harassed. Their families are getting harassed. They're walking out to their cars, and that's not what you want to feel every day you go to work on behalf of every Nevada citizen. So it's understanding not just the computer systems, it's not understanding the technology, but it's remembering that these are humans. We all have hearts. We're all doing this because we have the same goal. We want a democracy that includes us, listens to us, and allows us to participate. But when somebody's preventing that from happening, we need to stand up to those bullies and say, you are not going to do this anymore, because these people deserve the right to earn a living just like you. And so I think one of the priorities going into this office is looking at that human component and saying, how do we protect these workers to be able to do the job that they do?
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the one big, I think we have a few minutes left. I'm going to ask the one big question, and I'll start with Secretary Chapman and come down to you, which is, well, number one, we've gone over so many of the important jobs the Secretary of State does. If you are, I know we have people streaming at home too, and probably a lot of Pennsylvanians on there as well. What is your ask of the people watching and people in this room as the Secretary of State?
My ask is really to talk with your neighbors, your friends and family about why you're voting in this election, what's at stake, why it's important, and make sure that you're talking to your friends, family, and neighbors about how to vote, making sure that they're requesting that mail-in ballot by the deadline, or registering to vote, updating their voter registration status. It's really critical. So just having those conversations at the local level, at the community level, is really going to be how we close the voter turnout gap here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Cisco.
Again, it goes back to, we are a community, and we want to be a community. I think people in Nevada are tired of being angry. They want to be engaged. They want to see Nevada be successful. They count on the individual freedoms that they experience every day in their lives. But they have to understand that we cannot protect those freedoms. We cannot build community unless we allow everybody the opportunity to participate in voting. And that participation, that fundamental right, is critical to everything else we do. I like to say, and say this often, is strong leaders inspire. Weak leaders create fear. And right now, there are individuals like my opponent creating fear, and that is not acceptable. We have to continue to inspire. We have to drive a vision that the democracy we want to be exists, and it can be better, but it requires participation by all of us.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you, Secretary Griswold, with two hats on, as Secretary of State and as the head of the National Democratic Association. Secretary of State, Des, what are your asks?
Well, I think there's a couple things. Democracy is on the ballot. It is across this nation. This is not a philosophical, like, let's talk about democracy. It is literally on the ballot. Americans are going to be voting for people who are telling us they are destroying the stability of the country, for people who tell us they will suppress the vote, destabilize elections, or they'll vote for Democratic candidates who will follow the law and uphold the will of the people. Democracy is on the ballot. But we know now all of our fundamental freedoms are on this November's election ballot. We are seeing extremist policies putting in place across this nation. The fact of it is, women are no longer full citizens in this country. We cannot make decisions about our bodies, about our futures. We have such extreme elected officials in this country that they're unable to say a woman who has been raped deserves access to an abortion, and any little girl who is pregnant has been raped. No 10-year-old should carry a baby. We don't have elected officials like that anymore. We're seeing the perversion of the Second Amendment being used as an excuse to send second graders to their deaths at school. We're seeing governors unwilling to say they will not get rid of birth control in 2022. There was just a vote in Congress. Every Republican in our congressional delegation voted against protections for marriage equality and interracial marriage a month ago. The same people who are attacking women, who are attacking the ability to send our kids to school and know that they'll be okay, who are attacking marriage equality, are the same people stripping Americans of the freedom to vote because they know the American people are not with them. And the only way they're able to put this minority lifestyle in view on all of us is by suppressing the vote at the ballot box. 2022 is about protecting the ability for us to have a functioning democracy into the future. It's also about being able to live in a country where we can love how we want, determine the future how we want, have kids when we want, to be truly free. So what I'm asking of every single person here and everybody streaming is to do one thing to save democracy and our fundamental freedoms. Join a campaign, chip in, organize, join an NGO. Make sure Americans get to the ballot box. Make sure you're part of saving this country.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel very honored again to have been up here and get to meet everyone and hear from you. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I think you'll probably, on the way out, get to say hi to some of these amazing elected officials and candidates. So with that, I will just say thank you again. Thank you for everything you're doing, and on to November. Thank you.